study in India. Yeah. Recording in progress. Okay. So like that, a lot of sacrifice people made, especially Western people. A lot of them did so much to come and study the Dharma in India, the land of its birth. A lot of sacrifice. And now Jimmy, I would say, is kind of like Dalai Lama ji said, he's Indian because he's had so much rice and dal and chapati. So pura
because I live in Mahabharat, it's the center of the universe, spiritual universe. No, I just come from the most barbaric country in the world, America, which is Bangladesh, which is always at war.
So I'll leave it to Jimmy now. I think he's already started.
And I just came from being there for a year, which was a very frightening thing. It was because of all the COVID fanaticism. And now
so let me just formally say,
anti-Russian fanaticism.
Please,
yeah,
teach us the Dharma.
Okay, that's very important.
From the Pagal Desh to the
Pagal
Desh.
That's very important.
Please,
because in traditional Buddhism, you're not allowed to proselytize. It's one of the great things about Buddhism. You can't just get up and say, I'm going to tell you this. Somebody has to request it, You can't stand on a bench in the park and go, have you thought about the Buddha today? You're going to go to hell. So it's very important, and that's why people do it. I'm not asking for a mandala offering, but that covers it, to do.
We can also.
No. It's so anyway, I'll carry on because this part isn't that important. I've never been in a befuddled state, maybe in my life. I was traveling for 30 hours almost without sleep, and then I got here and it's hot. And then I went up cold for 24 hours, and last night I didn't sleep at all. Today I went and got eye injections and was running all over.
Something to drink?
She's supposed to be bringing something.
There's
a cup of cold tea.
Yeah.
So anyway, so it's good what Kabir said, because I have no idea what I'm going to say. It's certainly not coming from me. But what I always do is I make a prayer to my guru, Lama Yeshe, and may you benefit from whatever comes through. It might be in a little befuddled state right now because it's a vast topic.
A lot of beginners, by the way, Jamila.
Yeah,
a lot of beginners.
He keeps going on about beginners. Don't teach the Dharma, they're beginners. No, stop informing me of that. Anyway, so and I did this course online. Well, this is what's so precious for me. I'm back in a Gompa with real people, It's been all on Zoom for a year and a half, and it really is strange. My first time I'm on Zoom, I just said, I want to do it from the Tushita Gompa. But I'm alone in this big vast Gompa, and that was a mistake. Because you're used to looking at faces and seeing how people able to do. So it's very specific. Forgive me for being in such an extremely befuddled state right now. But this topic, what is the topic again? It's Mahayana Buddhism, Sutra and Tantra, dividing it into two, and then the essence of each and how to practice each, basically, which is a huge, vast topic, But anyway, it worked very well about 5 weeks ago. And now I thought, I don't know what I'm going to say. Navita came upstairs and says, Kabir, you're going to have 2 more minutes. Well, 2 more minutes going to do if I can't prepare anything now. But I was in a dead state of time in a while. So I got caffeine coursing through my veins, that wonderful elixir. So hopefully some of Lama Yeshe will spill through. So anyway, we'll do some fundamental basic prayers. They're probably familiar to you. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the practicing of giving the Dharma, or in your case, listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha, awakened in order to benefit all beings. Sangye chodan soki chonam la changchu bardu dharni kapsuchi dagi jogi pe sonam ki roll up and sheer sangye drupa sho sangye chodan soji chonan pa changchu paru dami kyap suchi dagi jinso yi besonam ki roll causes exactly the definition of love. Love, which isn't bargaining. I love you because you're beautiful. I love you because you're nice to me. It just means I want you to be happy and have the cause of happiness so it's sustainable. That's the first immeasurable. And the second is may all beings be free of suffering and the causes of suffering, which of course, and we'll more than mention it, which is the cause of suffering, the cause of dukkha is karma and klesha. The more we understand fundamental dharma, what is the cause of suffering, karma, and then the mental afflictions, then the more that little prayer means something powerful. The more we understand what we're saying, the more powerful it becomes. May all beings never be separated from bliss, which is free from sorrow, and may all beings abide in a state of equanimity, free of the extremes of attachment and aversion, greed and hatred. So now I'm going to be doing something which is usually more for kind of long, but it's so fundamental to what we're doing here, because it's fundamental to the Dharma. It's the Heart Sutra. I'll read that, and it's all about shunyata, emptiness, dependent arising. As we'll understand from talking here, what makes something Buddha Dharma, the essential thing is that everything is dependent arising. It's just empty of being independent. And we'll go through those four seals. What is Dharma? And we'll build it from there. But the fundamental thing that's so important for it to be Buddha Dharma, the thing that distinguishes it from all other dharmas, is this shunyata, dependent arising thought. If it has that, that almost makes it Buddhism. It also should have impermanence, and we'll talk about this. Or not. And the fundamental sutra is the Heart Sutra. So you kind of got to understand into the language things because it's very important. Thus, I have heard at one time a sutra. Oh, because we're talking about sutra and tantra. This is the main sutra. Thus, I have heard at one time is a statement. It goes before a sutra that it was actually witnessed, usually by Ananda. Ananda, who was the nephew of the Buddha and memorized all the Buddha speech. The Lord was staying at Rajgir on Vulture Peak Mountain together with a great host of monks and a great host of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Lord was composed in the concentration on the course of dharmas called profound illumination. So what you have here is a sutra is something that's spoken by the Buddha. But this sutra, the Buddha didn't speak the sutra. He speaks through two other characters. He speaks through Avalokiteshvara, representing the Mahayana. He speaks through Shariputra, who represents kind of the fundamental Buddha Dharma. They always represent the two, and he speaks through them. They're set up, they're set up. It's like poor Shariputra, he's put in the situation where he represents the two. So the Buddha doesn't teach, he goes into this deep samadhi and he teaches through these two. One is recommending the individual vehicle, and Avalokiteshvara, of course, represents the Mahayana. And so those are divisions of what we're going to be talking about today too. So it's all contained in this. Then through the inspiration of the Buddha, in other words, through his inspiration, the elder Shariputra said to the noble Lord Avalokita, the Bodhisattva and Mahasattva, how can any son of a good family train who wishes to engage in the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom? And the noble Lord Avalokita, the Bodhisattva, the elder Shariputra, as follows. This is very interesting. Shariputra, he says, how should any how should any son of a good family, Shariputra says that. And Avalokiteshvara answers, and this wasn't changed to be politically correct. This is in the original text. Shariputra, any family who wishes to engage in the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it thus. He or she beholds the five skandhas and in their own being are empty. So here again, you have Shariputra, the strict Sangha, and you have Avalokiteshvara, the great Bodhisattva, and it's in the original language of the text, he or she, it's included right there. Sometimes they try to edit it, but they don't need to edit it. It's already there. Shariputra, any son or daughter of a good family who wishes to engage in the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it thus. He or she beholds the five skandhas and that in their own. The five skandhas are the five constituents. The Buddha divided us into five parts. They'll be mentioned here. He divided this, and he could have divided this into 100 parts or 2 parts. He could have just divided this into nama and rupa, body and mind. So he divides this into body, which is the rupa skandha, and then there's 4 mind, and then in between he divided it into like 50 million with love, compassion, etc. There's negative ones like hatred and pride and jealousy, and there's all these other mental factors. These are states that rise and fall in the mind. So divided into these, and then the second one, and you'll hear it here, feeling. He gave an entire skandha to feeling, and he gives the entire skandha into perceptions or discriminations, and all the other 49 mental factors are formations. And I'll explain a little bit about that because it's so fundamental. Because that's what we are. We're these 5 heaps. The Buddha divided this into these 5 heaps. And often they're translated as aggregates, which is a horrible translation. The whole point is it means it's heaps, like piles, like a pile of sand, like a pile of dust. What we are is a pile of consciousnesses, a pile of feelings, a pile of this, and it helps us from grasping at something so solid. I am so solid. There's such a solid base. In the language of the Buddha, he did that. And so the whole essence of emptiness and the whole emptiness of that is right here. He looked at the 5 skandhas and saw that in their own being are empty. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Emptiness does not differ from form, and form does not differ from emptiness. Likewise, feelings, recognitions, volitions, and consciousnesses are empty. Now, empty doesn't mean nothing. Empty means things are dependent arising. Emptiness means relativity. We get lost with vacuity, emptiness. It means everything that exists is empty of being independent because it's a relativity. Something being independent is a non-existent. It doesn't exist. So it's so fun to understand that because we get lost. Emptiness, it sounds like some kind of void nihilistic tone, something like that. So in their own being are empty. In other words, in their own being, they're empty because they're related to everything else. They're related to all the others, etc. Shariputra, so Shariputra, all dharmas are emptiness. Dharma here means phenomena. There's also like dharmas used for like the Buddha Dharma, like Buddhism, or you could say Hindu Dharma. But here it just means phenomena. All dharmas are emptiness. Lacking differentiating marks, they're not produced or stopped, not defiled, not immaculate, not deficient, and not complete. So therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness, there's no form, no feeling, no volition, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. No visible form, no sound, no smell, no taste, no tangible, no mental object, no eye element, etc., up to no mind and no mental consciousness element. No ignorance and no extinction of ignorance up to no aging and death. So what the Buddha is going through here is all the important aspects of being, all the importance of Buddhism, of Dharma. They're all empty. The Buddha is also empty. Buddhism is also empty. It's like, because religions tend to see like we have an ultimate truth. God is the ultimate truth. They don't say Buddha is the ultimate truth. He's another relativity, or he wouldn't exist. And if he wasn't impermanent, he wouldn't function. So you don't expect to be able to understand this sutra, because where this sutra comes from, it's called the Prajnaparamita Sutras, the sutras of wisdom, which were brought to us by Nagarjuna. And there's the Prajnaparamita of 100,000 slokas or verses. There's the Prajnaparamita of 25,000 slokas or verses. And there's the Prajnaparamita of 8,000 slokas or verses. And there's this, which is the Prajnaparamita of 8 verses. So all that's fit into 8 verses. So naturally, they're extremely abbreviated. So it's something you learn and you learn as you go and fill it in, you know. When you first hear it, it's like, it's just so terse. So now he's going through, there's no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no, all of the different things he's going through, all of the sacred things of Buddhism. There's no Four Noble Truths, there's no suffering, there's no end of suffering. All the sacred things of Buddhism are also empty. It's very important because the Buddha doesn't want us to grab on to Buddhism as being something true and solid. It's just like everything else. It also changes, it's also, and it, it was like nothing can exist independently. It's a non-existent because everything is a relativity. Everything is dependent on its parts. It's dependent on causes and conditions, dependent on someone knowing it, and it's a very subtle level, which we won't even start to go into. It's dependent on mind. This is something you can grow into over time. And just hearing this without even understanding it has a great effect. The purpose of reading the Heart Sutra that they do before series of teachings, one is because it's said to remove all obstacles, just to recite it and to hear it to the teaching to take place. And second, because it's talking about emptiness, which is the thing that removes all obstacles. Finally, emptiness, shunyata, is what removes all obstacles to the light. And then in this case, and what we're doing here, Sutra and Tantra. So here we have Sutra. We have a Sutra, example of a Mahayana Sutra, a very abbreviated one. So we start off with that. So we'll talk about the divisions of Sutra and Tantra more in a minute. So no origin, no cessation, no path, no wisdom, knowledge, no attainment, and no non-attainment. So he's going through all these things and saying, no, no, no. It doesn't mean no, they don't exist. It means they don't exist independently. There's no Buddha attain. I mean, wow, it's profound thought. It's just another thing we're grasping at. It's another dependent arising. Doesn't mean it doesn't function. It doesn't mean it isn't real. It doesn't exist. In fact, if it wasn't empty, it couldn't function. And this is something we grow into over time. I heard things at the beginning when I was in the Dharma, and it's like, wow. And then later, it was, by not grasping at it and worrying about if I'm getting or not, it was things that just came to me in different circumstances. But it's just the blessing of hearing it. Because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas relying on the perfection of wisdom without obscuration or thought, and so are unafraid, transcending perverted views, they attain in the end nirvana. This is extremely important because he even says there's no attainment. There's no attainment of Buddhahood. And he also says, until one realizes that there's no attainment, this highest state, there will be fear. Then we overcome all fear, because fear, as we'll see, fear is a driving factor in our lives. And Dharma teaches like that. All this, we'll talk about it. It's very important to see. So, and fears is so important to overcome fear, but you don't overcome fear until you're a fully enlightened being. Until that point, there's still going to be fear, so we don't have to feel, oh no, good, I'm not afraid. I'm not supposed to be afraid. You know, we put ourselves down a lot. And, oh, I have fear. So anyway, and attain in the end nirvana. All Buddhas existing in the 3 times, relying on the perfection of wisdom, fully awakened to the highest perfect enlightenment. Therefore, one should know that the mantra of the Prajnaparamita is the mantra of great knowledge, the highest mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra which allays all suffering, the truth, since it has nothing wrong. The Prajna of the Prajna Paramitas proclaim, Tayata, Gate Gate Paragate, Parasamgati Bodhisvaha. Do you want to say it together? If you don't, doesn't matter. Gate Gate Paragate, Parasamgate Bodhisvaha. Gate Gate Paragate, Parasamgate Bodhisvaha. So there we get to say a mantra, and then that gets to be what is the essence of Tantra. Tantra is mantrayana. It's about mantra. In this way, but arose from that concentration and commended the noble Lord Avalokita, the Bodhisattva and Mahasattva, saying, well well done, O son of a good family. Lord had uttered this, the elder Shariputra, the noble Lord Avalokita, the Bodhisattva and Mahasattva, and all the people present, including the Devas, human beings, Asuras, and Gandharvas, were delighted and applauded the Lord's speech. This completes the Arya Bhagavati Prajnaparamita Sutra. Priya. Okay, so that's an example of a sutra. So sutras are said to be the word of a Buddha. And in this one, he spoke through the other two. And so the name of this whole teaching is Mahayana Sutra and Tantra. So here we have a Mahayana Sutra, very abbreviated. And as I'll mention here, Lama Yeshe, my teacher, he was the one who laid out the whole program for how we're going to study Dharma. He taught we're going to study the Lam Rim. Lam Rim is the graduated path. Lam is the path. Rim is graduated. And what the Lam Rim is it just brings in all of the different sutras. So we don't have to study and memorize and read every sutra. They've been brought together by great masters, and you get them woven into this gradual path, going from the lowest scope right up into Tantrayana. And that was his teaching, and Lama calls that sutra. And then also Lama said it was extremely important that we have Tantra. It's not just something up here. We need to have it. And for that, he introduced it by way of something called Vajrasattva. It's a very powerful purification retreat. Vajrasattva, we'll explain later what Vajrasattva is. So he says we must have the two. And it'll become more clear when we talk today why we have to have the two. What one's dealing with and what the other one is comes along and deals with what's not being covered in the sutras. They're both, of course, based on, in order to be Buddha Dharma, so we'll go back to that. What makes something Buddhism? What makes it Buddha Dharma? The four seals. All compounded phenomena are impermanent. All phenomena are empty of individuality. All phenomena, all afflicted minds cause suffering or dukkha. Afflicted minds are like greed. And the removal of those afflictions is nirvana or peace. You have the whole path there. And then that is abbreviated form of the Buddha's first teaching, the first sutra, the teaching of the Four Noble Truths. Dukkha, suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path leading to the cessation of suffering. So right there, boom. It's so important, because if it doesn't have those, it's not Buddha Dharma. One of our gurus is Dzongzar Khyentse Rinpoche, when we like, he wrote a know if you're not a Buddhist, how to know that you're not a Buddhist. And it's all about these four seals, because we think we know we're Buddhist or not. We think we're Buddhist because we take refuge in the three jewels. And that's kind of in general, it's kind of like a commitment that we take. But in our tradition, they teach that you have the three jewels of refuge, the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha, but the real one is the Dharma. They give often an epithet for the Buddha as a physician. So the real refuge isn't in the physician, it's in the medicine, isn't it? That's what really cures us. So that's where that comes from. And And some has four seals. It figures it's some Dharma or not. If it has those, it's Dharma. If it doesn't, it's not Dharma. And have any of you ever done any what they call Vipassana meditation, basic Satipatthana? It's there's the most simple, basic form of meditation. It's not simple because it's not deep. The basic way that was taught is we observe. In fact, it's the only thing that Buddha taught how to meditate. It's really, Vipassana is really actually a name for the result. For the foundations of mindfulness. So you sit and you just observe. Your breath, observe the sensation. It's up deep, it's up deep. And then you gain gradually the tools with which you can investigate the mind. So we have to know what is the mind. So in this kind of meditation, you're developing mindfulness and concentration. You develop them. They're not even virtues in themselves. But if you have concentration, all the spiritual powers can come from that in mindfulness. People who can walk through walls and walk on water and do all these things, read minds, it all comes from having one point of concentration and applying in a certain way. That's why it said that what else you need to have bodhicitta, you need to have the Mahayana. So within that kind of meditation, which is the first thing taught, one observes the body, but one observes feelings as you sit there, the body, feelings, mind, and objects of mind. You do hours and hours and hours. You observe those things. And what do you see in those things? You see that they're impermanent. You see that there's no self there. And you see that dukkha, the suffering, comes from and how suffering comes from the mind also. You see it all directly, very simply, by just observing what's going on. So you're observing the four seals in your daily practice. And you realize that there's great space when those are arising. And that's considered the simplest form of meditation, but simple does not mean it's not profound. It's completely profound. It's what the Buddha taught as a way to be free. And to be free, you would have to realize emptiness, shunyata. So how does that work? How would you realize emptiness sitting there doing this kind of sitting meditation? Have any of you ever done this kind of meditation? It's very commonly practiced, and it's good. It's a good basis. People like it because it doesn't involve a lot of the dogma, etc. Not dogma, but you have to study up. So anyway, you're sitting there and absorbing those things. And you're supposed to just stay with the sensation of the breath at the nose or the rising and falling in the abdomen. And you'll do that and then finally there'll come some distraction. And when the distraction becomes so loud and so distracting, you gently move your mind to that particular distraction. And you do it with intention, because karma and intention are the same thing. Pretty much. Action means action with intention. So you also start learning about intention, and you're taught that you don't move your mind to where there's a distraction. You gently lift it and say, now I'm intending to observe. And where often does the first distraction come from? Pain in the knee. You're sitting there. I had this teacher go Inkaji once. When you're a dead beginner, you've never meditated, you had to sit for 1 hour at night and swear you would not move. You wouldn't move, and after 3 minutes, you swear, I'm going to be crippled. This isn't going to work. My knee is hurting so much. It gets bigger. And so when you move your attention to the pain in your knee, you see that there's no pain there. But one of the things you understand when you study Dharma, fundamental Dharma, the mind and mental factors, you study what are the 5 sense consciousnesses. What is the object of a tactile consciousness? The only objects of a tactile consciousness that you're feeling in your body when you're meditating is sharp, dull, hot, cold, rough, smooth. That's basically it. Those are the only things that it can appear to that consciousness. There's no such thing as pain. So pain is a concept. Pain is a conceptual mind that's labeled to that sharp or that dull, and you go and you think it's so real, this pain so real. And you realize you've already realized the emptiness of pain, that it's something labeled to this horrible, horrible sensation that's going on at your knee, because you studied that the only object of a tactile consciousness can be those things. Pain is something that's added on. And lo and behold, when you go that, it goes away. You start looking what's really going on there, these different sensations, oh, it goes away. It's really quite amazing. You know? And so right away, you have these four seals, which are the basis of what's called the lower school of tenets, which is the Vaibhashika, which is all about these things, impermanence, et cetera, et cetera. They're not so lower in a way, but in terms of philosophy, they might be lower, but they're the fundamental basis for Buddhist meditation, as taught in the Theravada tradition, et cetera. So that's just an example of the profundity you can have from something that seems so simple. So where do we go from here? We have a lot to go from there. So, and that's the kind of the way it will be. So we have Sutra and Tantra. So anyway, Lamrim and Bodhisattva. Lamrim is basically a compendium of sutras. And Vajrayana is something I can briefly introduce of what Lama said. It was our way to start getting into Tantra. And so we had the four seals, the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths come from these four seals, the first turning of the Dharma, yeah. Suffering or dukkha, its cause, the end of dukkha. Suffering is a really bad translation for dukkha, you know, because suffering's too heavy of a connotation. There is suffering, like really heavy suffering, but dukkha just means the opposite of sukha. Sukha means completely cool. It means completely comfortable. And dukkha means completely uptight. Lama Yeshe, he loved the words he learned from the hippies. He says, you hit it right on the spot. He says, uptight, you say uptight, because when you have anger, when you have attachment, it's not just a mental factor, your body. Tantra is dealing with all that as well. So is this kind of meditation. You feel this twisting and turning inside. You feel that an emotion is not just a mental thing, it's a physical thing. As we know, our palms get sweaty, etc. So you observe. So
Jimmy, could you just explain for us what is Theravada, what is Mahayana, what is, but people don't know these terms.
The Buddhism has two, and one is called the Theravada Buddhism, the kind of the original, or the sometimes they call it the Pali, because it comes from the Pali Sutras, the original sutras. I mean, sometimes they'll call it Hinayana, but that's a pejorative term. They themselves the little vehicle, you know. And then Mahayana means the great vehicle. So it's all divided into that, and the main Buddhism the main Buddha Dharma that's practiced in Sri Burma and in Thailand and these places is this original, the old school. Theravada means teaching of the elders. Like Shariputra was the that we have in our sutra there. And so that's, and there's Mahayana Buddhism, which we're talking about, Mahayana Sutra and Tantra. Mahayana Buddhism is a Buddhism that the motivation, the wish we practice to completely awaken, to become a Buddha, fully awakened Buddha in order to benefit all beings. So it's called the Bodhisattva. Bodhi means Buddha, awakening. We're working towards becoming completely awake as a Buddha is. And in the Theravada, the goal is to become free from suffering, free from the wheel of birth and death, which means you're free. The cause of both of them is realizing shunyata, the same shunyata. But the motivation is to be free from cyclic existence. Because in their Buddhism, they say, only Buddhas are just something that are very rare. But Mahayana says, if it's possible to be a Buddha, you should go for it. You know? So these are the two great divisions of Buddhism. And so basically Mahayana Buddhism is just, the goal is to become fully awakened. And we motivate, but the way we become fully awakened is by wanting to benefit all beings. We wish to become awakened because that way we can benefit all beings. There's a wish.
Jamila, what's the essence of the Theravada? What are they aiming at?
They're aiming at being free from cyclic existence, free from birth and death.
Free from birth.
So it's the same, the essence of shunyata, isn't it? But then in the Mahayana Buddhism, they combine that shunyata with the altruistic wish to become awakened for the benefit of all beings. That makes it. When we're wishing to enlighten practice, and and we should wish for that, even though it might take countless eons, an unbelievable amount of time to get awakened. What else is there but to try to become completely awakened for the benefit of all beings? Because realize that right now, I can't really help. But if I was fully awakened, I could help all beings. If I was more awakened, I'd be more effective in helping all beings. So that's the Mahayana path. It's a motivation that combines with it. So good question. So in Theravada, exactly the same realization of shunyata. One will eventually become free, will become an arhat or a full destroyer, free from cyclic existence. But to become a fully awakened Buddha, it takes a lot more. I hate the word merit, but you have to practice this path for a long, unimaginably long time to gain enough spiritual momentum by wishing to work for others, wishing to work for others, wishing to work for others. And that's the path of a bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is a person in the Mahayana path, bound for bodhi, like that. So does that make sense? And a lot of stuff, a lot of information, but hopefully it awakens and then it comes up later, and it's fundamental tools. And so anyway, like don't expect to understand the Heart Sutra when you first hear it. As I said, it's a condensation from all these sutras, and they study it. The Buddhist monks, they study it and debate it for years and years and years and years and years to get to the most subtle meaning. And so naturally, it's all reduced into this. It's like you're not going to get it right away. But in fact, a lot of it's pretty understandable. What the Heart Sutra was doing is he says, he looked down and saw these, the Buddha divided us into these 5 parts, right? 5 skandhas, basically body and consciousness. And in between there are other forms of consciousness factors. So we divided it in body. And the reason Buddha was so skillful, when he called it skandhas, he called it heaps. So we don't grasp, we're just 5 heaps, we're just piles, We're a pile of feelings. Like Thich Nhat Hanh says, we're like a river of feelings, and we're a river of sensations, and we're a river. And you can't grasp at the river, it's just flowing all the time. You can't grasp at a pile, there's nothing to grasp. And that's the idea. There's nothing, everything is empty, so there's nothing to grasp at. On top of that, he divided it into these 5. And so he gave an entire skandha to feeling, the mental factor of feeling. And in Buddhism, the mental factor of feeling is quite specific. It isn't, I have all these good feelings when I went to the art fair. It's no, feelings just means you get it, you like it, you don't like it. When you rise, this is not different. These feelings arise. And when we first perceive it, we think, I like this, I don't like this, I'm indifferent to that. This is so fundamental. So that's why he gave a whole skandha to that. And then why did he give a whole skandha to perceptions or discriminations? Everything that appears to us from our beginning, everything that will ever appear to us, it'll feel, we'll say, I like this, I don't like that. And then the next one, the discrimination says, I want this, I don't want that. I want the good, I don't want the bad. And that's the attachment and aversion that propels us going around in cyclic existence, wishing to have the good and not wanting the bad and going around and around. So it's so crucial that he gave a whole skandha, because this is so fundamental. Everything that appears from us, that's the way it happens. we judge it, isn't it? Oh, I like that. I don't like that. This is why when you get a translator, you go take somebody in to see the Geshe and they think all these terms. And the person's asking a question. I have all these good feelings and these wonderful feelings about it. And the Geshe go, what? What's that? What are they talking about? Because he has it's not about how we feel at the art fair or about what we Hendrix. It's all of it. So one thing about Buddha Dharma is very precisely defined. And you can get the whole monastic education in a school up in Dharamsala. You can do the whole thing that all the monks study for many years. It's called the Sunni Labtra. Sunni means definitions, and Labtra means school. You learn a definition for everything. Everything is very precise. Before you start discussing it, you get your what we're talking about. You're talking about that. what this knowing phenomena. The first is good enough, what the bad. Well, this brings up another great division. It's one of the first things that we're taught when we learn Lamrim from our lamas. We might have to have all compounded phenomena are impermanent. Everything there's nothing independently existent. Afflicted minds lead to suffering, and the removal of afflicted minds leads to peace. Nirvana is peace. So, so if it has those, it's Dharma. If it doesn't have those, it's not Dharma. And also, when we're grasping onto things, one of the first things we go in our tradition, we always start our teachings. Why are we here? Because we want something. We want to be happy. We want things in life because we think they're going to bring us happiness. We think a new computer, a new relationship, a Dharma course, a yoga course. We grasp after these things because it's going to bring us happiness, but it cannot, because everything outside is impermanent. It's changing all the time. So we grasp at something and it changes, doesn't it? Relationship's a good one. Computer's a good one. It all changes. A car, whatever, it changes. Everything is changing. All compound phenomena. Impermanent, subtle impermanence means that everything's constantly in flux. And if things weren't impermanent, they couldn't function. The Buddha is impermanent. Means the one moment of Buddha mind goes to be the next moment of Buddha mind, because the Buddha has to be able to function. So the first thing is we were looking for happiness outside. And anything we grasp at to be happiness, it's changing. And so we get disappointed. 2, emptiness. We are projecting. We project on that outside phenomena as being good or not, right? Look at a relationship. Look at it as best, you know. And then it changes, you know. But the qualities are not existing from the side of the person, and nothing existing from the side of the place or whatever. We're projecting it, and it's going to be projected different by different people. I'll give a couple of really concrete examples. Lama Yeshe, Lama Yeshe, one time, one of the first teachers I went, he comes into this big tent and he says, he's telling us about someone, one of his students came to him and said, Lama, I've met the perfect Dakini. I've met, she's the real practitioner. This is the one I'm going to go to enlightenment with. She's the most beautiful. She's the most subtle person I've ever met. All these qualities. And he says, this person can and he goes, she doesn't have a to us. Impossible. One woman changed that much in 2 weeks, dear. And it's that way. You see how it's a projection. We could be crazy about some woman, or say we're a woman, some man, and your best friend like, oh, you got to be kidding him. You know, same objects, because we project on something. Or let's take another example. Kathmandu. When I first went, I was in a Pure Land. It was like, this is a Pure Land here. Like, wow. And many people would say, wow, it's a Pure Land. Everything was most exquisite. Oh, I've never been to a place so good. Yet somebody might get off their plane from Switzerland and they step off the plane and they go, oh my God, you know, there's shit all over the streets, being everywhere. You know, it's the highest level, the second highest level of endemic diseases of any place on the planet, except one little country in Africa. You know? So if you're looking at that, you think, oh my God, Kathmandu is really a shithole. And so, but it's the same object, isn't it? In a different view. And so Kathmandu doesn't exist from its own side as being happy and beautiful. It's projected. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's the same thing. We project it, and we project onto this eye, you know, as being, or somebody else good or bad. This is gradually something you become familiar with. So it keeps us in cyclic existence. It's called what's they're using ego in Tibetan is wrong zin. Wrong is self, zin is grasping at a self as being independent and real. Okay? We grasp it, the I or Jimmy or Kabir or Nidita, we grasp it. This is real. We believe it. And it's not such a, sometimes we put down, of course, and we're gonna believe this for a long time. We're not gonna believe it for a long time, but it'll appear to us. There's something, this may be a little bit, this might be interesting for a couple of people. When you reach the highest state of Buddhist practice, you're free from samsara. You've realized the emptiness of all phenomena. You don't have any self-grasping or grasping. Still, everything is existing from its own side. We cut the illusion. To give the example of the illusionist, he pulls the snake out of the hat and everybody's afraid in the audience. He's not afraid because he knows it's fake, but it appears just the same. So until you're a Buddha, even 10th level Bodhisattva with all the clairvoyances long ago free from samsara, things still appear that way. Mom still appears, but they realize this is just illusion. And so don't feel so bad that everything appears like it's existing from its own side. It's like Lama Yeshe, he used to say, long way to go, baby.
Jimmy, you started on the eighth worldly Dharma.
Okay. So the top. So we were at the point of it comes at this point, the eight worldly dharmas. Now we know what is dharma. The eight worldly dharmas are loss and pain, pleasure and pain, loss and gain, euphony and defamation, praise and blame. Okay, there's these four duplicates, and so we're caught in the world. We want gain, we don't want loss. We want something, we don't want. We don't want loss. We want blame. We want pleasure. We don't want pain, and we want to have a good reputation, bad reputation. So our whole, and when they're first taught, they're the first thing that's taught before the Four Noble Truths. Again, if Lama Zopa taught it at my first course for 3 weeks. He taught them for 3 weeks. He taught the Herons for 3 weeks. And he taught that attachment is the problem. And he taught that Tisha, who brought the new translation of Dharma to Tibet, lived in a house with 100,000 swimming pools. The first 3 weeks, and a lot of people leave the course, but somehow a lot of people don't. Because Lama Zopa, no matter how out there he was, there's something happening underneath where he's getting, and Lama Yeshe setting him up to do all this. So they were like the good cop and the bad cop. So anyway, we're so caught up in these worldly dharmas. So what happens with the worldly dharmas? We want pleasure, we don't want pain, right? So we're afraid we won't get pleasure, and we're afraid we'll get pain. So fear comes all that. We're afraid, we're afraid we're not. So throughout fear, I always wondered, why don't they have a mental factor of fear in Buddhism? That's where it comes. So much of our time is worrying or having fear that we won't get what we want, and worrying that we're getting what we don't want. So these are all worldly dharmas, right? And so by understanding that, when you first do a course with Lama Zopa, that's all. Lama Zopa would also say your permanent address, realms, and stuff like that, Anyway, it's hard sometimes. Because we spend so much of our time wanting gain and not wanting loss. And so there's a point where we can not grasp at that anymore. Non-attachment. Non-attachment, same as non-aversion, non-attachment. So Lama Zopa's teaching, we got to give up attachment to gain and attachment not having pain. It's where attachment comes in deep, not just attachment for a car, a person, etc., etc. Well, that's the same because of impermanence. It's loss and gain. And then my first course, after Lama Zopa teaches this for 3 weeks, Lama Yeshe, first time I ever heard him speak, he runs into the temple and he goes, "Who says attachment's bad?" And everybody's going, "Wow, I like the fat guy. I like this one." Lama Zopa's telling attachment. If you don't give up attachment, da 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 da. And then Lama Yeshe just puts another twist on it. Of course, he's teaching the same thing. he's basically teaching you not to get fanatical, because he said, if it wasn't for attachment, you wouldn't have this precious human rebirth, right? So another very fundamental, the first teaching in the Lam Rim almost, is that we have what we have is this precious birth. We have is so precious. It have all these qualities, our senses are there. We've met Dharma, we're human, we're born in a place where we have leisure. And rebirth in Tibetan is translated daljor, means leisure and endowments. Leisure means we have free time to practice or do whatever we want. Endowments means non-defective senses, meeting the Dharma, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so and most of us have that, and that's said to be the most precious thing. So it's the precious human rebirth. And so Lama Yeshe says, how would you get this precious human rebirth if mom and dad didn't have attachment? He just puts a different twist on it, but he's not contradicting. There's no contradiction. So it's so funny sometimes you don't get too fanatical about the whole thing with attachment, etc. So anyway, then we can take that right into what are we doing?
Just a question arises to me. So would you say
Yeah.
people who say, oh, Dharma or spirituality is just about having a lot of bliss, spiritual bliss, feeling good, feeling, peaceful. What would some say about that? Is that the sign of an authentic Buddhist practitioner? Someone who's just so blissed out, listening to, spiritual music or something.
Well,
and feeling good.
Well, that's it's very true, because then we have to get into very clarity. And we go into Tantra, they're talking about a bliss that is genuine. There is a genuine bliss. There is something that's genuinely blissful that can be experienced. And it's a yogic realization.
But the new agey kind of bliss?
No, that's they don't understand what is bliss. That's just more good feelings and stuff. It's true. So so just a couple of things, which I can just leap into things from teachings. So the first thing is they'll teach us the first two practices in the Lam Rim, the graduated path to enlightenment. You could say the first one is Guru, is the root of the path. We won't touch that right now. But is this precious birth that we have? And we got it. We were taught this again and again and again and again 100,000 times. It's so rare. It's like a tortoise coming in from the bottom of the ocean, and once every 100 years, sticking its head up is a human birth. And once every 100 years, sticking its head up and putting it right through a golden ring. That's how rare is a precious human rebirth. And it's like, wow, and you hear it again and again and again like that. And I remember even friends of mine say, if I hear that story again, if I hear about this precious human rebirth again. And then when I was teaching at Tushita in the good old days, there's a lot of good old days. Maybe we had 25 in a course. And at the end of each course, we used to sit like this with His Holiness Dalai Lama on the floor and ask questions. And one of the people asked, what do you do about depression? What should I do about depression? And the Dalai Lama said, well, if it's a chemical imbalance in the brain, that's not my department. I don't know, But he said, if you realize that you have a precious human rebirth in what you have, and that your fundamental nature is purity, you could never be depressed. You could only be happy all the time if you realize what I have is so precious. It's so precious. I have this freedom to do what I want. It's what you do with it. It's like getting bored is something's wrong if we're getting bored. Even from a worldly point of view, you could be creating music with it. So, and that just blew my mind. He says, those two things, depression, not possible. And the other one there is realizing that our fundamental nature is purity. That might be, how are we for time?
Time's ticking on. It's almost quarter to 8.
Okay. So maybe a thing, and we can come back through questioning, etc. Things.
What the nature of that?
Yeah, well, this is what's happening here. So anyway, Sutra and Tantra. So Sutra, the fundamental differences between sutra and tantra gets mixed up. It's about sexual practice. Yeah, I'm going for the tantra. And it comes out this thing about bliss too, because there is such a thing as real bliss, but people, it gets a little misunderstood. So anyway, and we can come back and you can bring me back to questions. So in a nutshell, that sutra, the Buddha taught sutras. A sutra is the teaching of a Buddha. We just read a very abbreviated part of an abbreviated sutra, the Heart Sutra, but the Buddha gave these incredibly vast and important teachings. And in Chinese Buddhism, they emphasize these sutras. There's whole schools that go around the sutras, from the Lotus Sutra. The main character is Avalokiteshvara, or Kuan Yin, comes that sutra school. From then there's the Avatamsaka Sutra, which is maybe the most profound of all sutras. Go on. Samantabhadra. Samantabhadra is the Bodhisattva. These are some of the two of the 8 great Bodhisattvas, Avalokiteshvara, Chenrezig, and Samantabhadra. So there's a whole sutra around Samantabhadra, and in that school they consider very different than the divisions of the Buddhism. They think that the Buddha first taught the Avatamsaka Sutra, which is so profound, and everything else was a digression. And so, that gets into a whole other level of divisions. So anyway, there's schools around those sutras. And in Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, they don't really read sutras too much, because what they say is, well, the Lam Rim has been, the great beings have read the sutras and they put just what you need in the Lam Rim. But there's something a little missing with that also, because some sutras you can read and they're very readable. They're just blissful to read. Avatamsaka, not the Avatamsaka, that's the most vast of all. Well, if you read the King of Prayers, that's just one little teeny part of the Avatamsaka Sutra. Or what was I going to say with respect to that?
So what's the necessity for Tantra, Jimmy? What's wrong with Sutra?
Well,
stick with Sutra. Why do we need Tantra?
The difference between the two, one primary difference between the two is the Sutra is all gross levels of consciousness. It's conceptual consciousness, is debating and labeling all these things, boom, 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 boom. And the fundamental difference between Sutra and Tantra is, so Sutra is dealing with gross consciousness, gross sense, mental consciousness, etc. And Tantra is dealing with the subtle consciousness, channels, winds, drops, chakras. There's a subtler mind.
So Sutra can't lead to enlightenment?
Even then, they say at the very end, you have to generate a subtler consciousness. Somehow it'll pop in there, which means you didn't have to practice the whole path of Tantra along the way. So it's a subtler mind that's being cultivated. It said can realize more profound things very quickly. It's more subtle than analysis and debating and labeling. Bam. And so that's one division. Sutra is dealing with gross consciousness and Tantra is dealing with subtle consciousness. So then let's look at some of the names for Tantra. Tantra, the word Tantra itself, Lama would say Tantrayana and Sutrayana, but the word Tantra, it means it comes from weaving. It comes from weaving. That there's this cord. And what is this? What is this thread? This thread is the pure nature of the mind. Like the Dalai Lama said, we wouldn't be depressed if we realize our fundamental nature is purity. We have a pure mind from the beginning, not an enlightened mind, but we have a basis of purity. Even a mind of anger has a basis of purity. Fundamentally, we're pure. And all of the problems and all the dukkha is like the clouds over the sun. It's all the attachment, aversion, worldly dharma is all on top of this pure nature. So the pure nature, the confidence that we even have it. We get so much into our gross selves that that our fundamental nature is purity. So Tantra's that. So Tantra is the thread of purity that goes from beginningless to endless. That's the basis. And then another name for Tantra, the one that's more commonly, is Mantrayana. Mantra is manas, mind in Sanskrit. Mantra is that which it's the cuts ordinary appearance. Mantra is something that cuts ordinary appearance. So Mantrayana. So Tantra is about cutting ordinary appearance, ordinary Jimmy, ordinary Kabir, ordinary Nivita, and identifying with this higher self. When you start dealing with this higher self, my fundamental nature is purity. It's false to label Navita or I or Jimmy or I, isn't it? To these five skandhas. So what is Tantra doing? It's labeling deity. Now we become Tara, and we're labeling that to our subtlest consciousness that goes below the skandhas. We're identifying with our highest self. It's still a projection. It still doesn't exist from its own side, but it's a higher basis. So we're identifying. So then you have this whole way of cutting through a lot of psychological problems. I've always looked at my observation of Sutra Buddhism, and then also doing Satipatthana meditation, is that it perfectly defines about emptiness, why we're in samsara, where all the problems come from, like, but it doesn't deal with the psychological issues. It doesn't deal with bad self-image, bad self-identity, all this stuff. Tantra, bam. Your true nature is Navita, it's Tara. You're actually Tara. You're just as much Tara as you are Navita, and you can prove that with logic, You're labeling yourself to the subtle consciousness instead of the five skandhas, and you identify with that. And so you start identifying with your higher self and calling it deity yoga, etc. And that can kind of, negative, We do this practice every day. What is it? You do the succession guru yoga? No, we're thinking Sri Rukaham. Now I'm a Ruka. We're not really a Ruka, but we're labeling ourselves to our subtler mind and identifying with our higher self. And so we attain the higher self more quickly.
So who is Tara? What's Tara?
Tara is a female Buddha. It's a fully enlightened being in feminine aspect. There's many. So let me just give the other definitions of Tantra. So that one is Mantrayana, manas, mind. And so it means to cut ordinary appearance. Cut ordinary appearance. So we're cutting ordinary appearance of I'm Jimmy. This is a gross world. We're living in then it's a pure land of Tara, or I'm Jimmy instead of Tara. We cut that ordinary appearance and identify with the higher appearance. Okay. And so what are these deities called in Tibetan? Deities isn't a great, they're called yidams. Yi is a word for mind. So Tara is a yidam, Avalokiteshvara is a yidam, mind. Tra, then again, like mantra, it's yidam means mind seal. We're sealing our mind with identifying with this higher self and higher reality, which isn't ultimately real. It's still empty of being ultimately real. So we're gradually identifying with a higher self. And then another word for Tantra is Vajrayana, right? Vajra. Vajra means indestructible. The Vajra is the diamond sign of indestructible being. So Vajra Sattva, the first thing Lama gives us is a practice. Don't worry about this being over our heads a bit. There's a practice it's a purification practice. He says we should do Lam Rim, Lam Rim, Lam Rim, and then he initiates us into Vajra Sattva, which is this practice where we do 3 months of doing 100-syllable mantra and identifying ourselves with our higher self. So Vajra Sattva, Vajra means indestructible, Sattva means being. And people think of Vajra Sattva as being a purification retreat. Vajra Sattva is the beginning of the path and the end of the path. Vajra Sattva, when you take say we're taking a tantric initiation from the Dalai Lama, okay? So say he's giving us a Tara initiation, and he's the guru, he's the enlightened guru. And there's one point in the initiation when you actually get the initiation, whether you understand all of the details, you absorb subtle Dalai Lama and Tara, and you bring them down to not just your subtle mind, but your subtlest mind, at your heart. So the subtlest mind at the heart, this is the one that continues from life to life, is purity. You identify with that.
Developed by Guru Padmasambhava.
Huh?
Guru Padmasambhava.
Yeah, Guru Padmasambhava. Yeah, okay. Well, that's one of that. we'll talk about Guru. He was an enlightened being, but we're talking about, but he wasn't a deity. You can practice like that. It's a guru yoga. So Vajrasattva is bringing down the guru. If Padmasambhava was your guru, you would bring him down and he would have given the initiation. You hold him in your heart like that. It's the indestructible division of your subtlest mind, the deity Tara and the Dalai Lama, boom. And that's Vajrasattva. That's a very deep concept. Don't worry about it in a way. But it's also a retreat that you do for purification. So one basic way that mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum is a mantra, right? You know, or Om Tara Svaha. So it's interesting. That mantra, by reciting that mantra and really deeply reciting that mantra and replacing our thoughts, he did this, she did that, blah, 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 blah. We replace it with that. And that's why you got these little old beings like Lama Zopa's mother. She said, all she did is think mantras. Oh, many Padme. She wasn't thinking he did that, she did that, Putin's bad, this is good. She just said mantra, and then she'd be saying mantra, 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 mantra. And then when the little child she's in program is doing something naughty, she goes over with her mom and goes, and then comes back and says the mantra, unbroken. And so when it's cutting through ordinary appearance, it's cutting through ordinary thinking. Instead of thinking blah, 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 we think Om Mani Padme Hum, or we think Om Tara. It's absolutely profound and it's absolutely simple. So you have some of these simple old grannies, and they're actually getting more realizations than us Westerners practicing Dharma and arguing about whose guru's better and blah, 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 caught up in the net of conceptual thinking. So in that sense, the mantra cutting ordinary appearance, but you also cut ordinary appearance. You think of your world as being a pure land. You think of your body as being a deity. But your thinking is doing mantra. It's very profound practices. And so then so you have Tantra is as its basis is this pure mind that we've had beginninglessly and endlessly, the basis we're working with. Mantrayana, we're cutting through ordinary appearance, identifying with a higher self, and that might even be formalized as a deity or a yidam. And then it's also bringing our guru and the deity down to our heart and becoming inseparable, because guru is like the root. So the gentleman asked about Padmasambhava. So that brings me to something I was going to talk about. How did Buddhism come to Tibet? Now we have a little idea what Buddhism is. In the 7th century, Padmasambhava, a great Mahasiddha, he was a great Tantric, this yoga. He came to Tibet and he brought Tantra to Tibet. And with him, Shantirakshita was a monk. He brought the Sutra path to Tibet. So there's where we get the two lineages coming originally. Guru Rinpoche came and overpowered all the demons of Tibet. And whether these demons are real demons or just through the psychology of it, we tamed everybody's minds. It's equally profound because it's about mind. So that was in the 7th century, okay? So that's where the first lineages came to Tibet. Buddhism was already full-blown in China by the 2nd century. And of course, when it went to, we're talking still Mahayana Buddhism here. And of course, it went as Theravada Buddhism, basic Buddhism, Pali Sutras went to Burma, et cetera, et cetera. And it turns out they had Tantra and these things there as well. I was in Sri Lanka. There's this one monastery where they took all the things were taught. It's quite interesting. So anyway, so why practice Tantra? Because it's said to be a much quicker path. It's a much quicker path to enlightenment. It's dealing with a subtler mind. It's using methods that's it's quicker. Well, quicker because it's dealing with a subtle mind. And so you can realize emptiness more quickly. And you can realize emptiness in the practice of doing deity yoga, identifying a star example. So it said the motivation has to be, the motivation for Tantra is if it's Mahayana. It's Mahayana Buddhism. So the motivation is to become fully awakened to benefit all beings. And it's a quicker path to that enlightenment. So if the only valid motivation for practicing Tantra is it has to be the Mahayana, that we want to become a Buddha in order to benefit all beings. And two, we just can't wait to get enlightened because we can't stand that there's so many beings out there that we've related to over countless lives that are waiting for us to get enlightened. Not literally, but quicker we can do that, you know. So that's why it's said to be a quicker path. And you can get enlightened more quickly, but it's a trickier path too, because it's easy to go off and get caught up in the bliss. It's dealing with bliss a lot, you know. So people can get attached to the bliss, and then it just becomes the opposite of Dharma. It becomes, you know, a deeper attachment. That's why it's given very gradually. Traditionally, it wasn't given for a long, long time. Even to become a, you get it. It's totally connected with Guru Yoga also. To get initiated into Tantra, that person, the preceptor, becomes your guru. You have to be ready to take that being as your guru. That's it. You brought them down to your heart. So there's a lot of stuff I'm talking about. So are there any more questions on the basis of that? And maybe we can fill, there's a lot of other things to fill in.
I think questions would be good. 'cause-
Okay, can we do,
Yeah.
can we do questions?
So just feel free to ask even the most basic question, because that will help.
The basic questions are always the most profound. People think I can't answer. They ask that, and it's the most profound, and everybody else wish they asked it.
What
Because
is the difference between Jain Buddhism and Mahayana?
Zen Buddhism is a form of Mahayana. It's a Mahayana Buddhism. Well, of the different schools in China, when Buddhism went to China, you had these sutra schools, one around the Lotus school around Avalokiteshvara. You had the Huayan school around Guhya Samaja, and you also had the Zen school, which was brought from India by Bodhidharma, who also, like Nagarjuna, came from South India. He brought it there, and so he comes from that, and it's a school that's emphasizing this kind of, it's called Chan. It's called Chan Buddhism in China, yeah. And even in Japan, my friends who are Chinese Buddhists, they're a little critical of how it got a little perverted with koans and all that stuff, you know. So because Chan, anyway, so there's Chan, that's another school, the Chan school, which is meditation. On the clear light, they're also meditating on their subtlest mind. You're trying to get down to that subtlest mind, identifying with the subtlest mind in that Buddhism. So that's the difference. There's different ways of getting down to that subtlest mind. I'm going to read a quote here from Lama Yeshe. This is the first thing that he wrote in his introduction to Tantra. If you want to know about Tantra, I have it here somewhere. And it has to do with this fundamental purity. It's in part of my notes from teaching course. The sensation of suffering. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to read the whole thing that the stains of our mind are occasional, not mixed with the fundamental purity. The fundamental purity of our be stained, but by our anger, by our delusions, can never touch that fundamental purity. If that stained the fundamental purity, no one can get enlightened. The fundamental purity is like water, and it's muddy, and you shake it up and it settles down. But H2O is always H2O. If the mud starts bonding with the H2O, it becomes not. But water, it's a good example. And a great example for kind of Chan meditation and identifying with it are also in Satipatthana meditation. Do you ever get these things at Christmas? You shake up and the snow settles. That's like the mind. And you shake it up, and at the end, it all settles and the water's clear. So much of that image is settling the mind and making the mind quiet. And then we're closer to our fundamental purity. We're getting a little away from all of this going through our mind all the time. He did, she did, judging. So the stains, they're not mixed with the fundamental purity, or no one can. Negative qualities don't have a valid foundation. But positive qualities do. that might be a little bit too much to explain right now, but we can balance our minds with antidotes, especially awareness, because we can totally purify our minds with wisdom. Positive qualities can be limitlessly developed, and we can transcend all bonds and limitations. In meditation, we can identify the conventional nature of our mind, which is covered by our own conceptions. We can stop past and future thinking all the time and let mind flow in its own nature. And anyway, the quote from Lama Yeshe is, no matter how confused or deluded we may be, the underlying and essential nature of our being is clear and pure. Like clouds in the sky don't damage the light-giving power of the sun. And the ultimate purpose of all spiritual practice, whether they are called Buddhist or not, is to uncover and make contact with this essentially pure nature. When we've developed our own nature of purity, compassion, and love, we can see their reflection in others. But if we have not contacted these qualities within ourselves, we will only see ugly and limited. For whatever we see every day is actually nothing more than a projection of our own inner reality. That's really profound. So he introduces the whole thought. Tantra and many parts of Dharma, like Chan or Zen, is just to sit and get a feeling for this inner quality. I think even in our lives, we'll have a special peak experience sometimes. Maybe it's even watching a sunset, quieting our mind completely, not subduing, not suppressing all of the thinking, but just going to a deeper state where there's quiet and clarity. We get a moment, we get a taste of our inner purity. And that can be cultivated more and more and more and more through definite practices. And one of them is practicing quickly is to practice deity yoga and Tarchiyana. Another one is doing Bachan meditation. Chan meditation is very similar to one part of Tantra that doesn't use deity yoga. It's called Mahamudra or Dzogchen, where we just identify with our subtle mind. We're getting closer and closer to that.
Question here.
Okay.
Just one practice non-attachment.
How?
How does one practice non-attachment?
Well,
Just repeat it for the Zoom people, maybe.
okay, Zoom people.
How many people on Zoom?
I can't even tell. I've only seen myself, and I saw one person at the beginning.
Only see yourself? Oh, yeah.
It's like the Jimi Hendrix time. I'm sitting in a room full of mirrors, and all I see is
That
me.
says 26.
Oh, there's 26 people. Should we look at them?
Yeah, look at them. See who they are.
Participants? I click on participants?
No, you want to see their faces, so make sure they're not robots.
Okay, we want to make sure there's not bots.
Oh, look, there's one of them.
Hey, brother.
He looks real.
Yeah. Okay. The question we ask is, how do we get rid of attachment? This is very, very, very important fundamental question. Because the practice of the path of Buddha Dharma in order is first realize shunyata, to realize emptiness of all phenomena, right? And so that can take that can take lifetimes. It can take a long time. The base that's done is that you have to get a very clear appearance of what appears, how yourself, the false I appears. How the false I, the I that never existed. Like say you just arrived in wallet in your passport in the New Delhi train station. You get this my self-existent I lost. It comes up very Kabir, you're in total disaster. You stole the money from the gump. I didn't do it. It comes up very, very strong. So it's hard to meditate at those times when we're disturbed. So it takes time to get a clear appearance of the false I, and then you have to get one point of concentration, which is a whole exercise. It's almost impossible in this day and age. where you can have one point of concentration. Why is that? As long as there's television and cell phones, nobody's going to get one point of concentration. It's not going to happen. It can't happen. That means for 6 months, you can sit there and hold one object without going, and you can build it up. You can build it up. You can learn to concentrate more and more and more and more and more. And you don't have to have the powers to be able to investigate the mind, one point of concentration in mindfulness. Those factors can be developed. Just like if you eat protein and do this with weights, you'll get muscles, whether you want them or not. You don't have to believe in Jopa. You don't believe in Buddha. If you put your mind, that's why it's not considered a virtue in itself. All traditions have it, and even people like probably Einstein and evil people sometimes have one point of concentration. The power of mind comes from that. It's how you use it. So developing one point of concentration to be able to see this I directly that never existed that way, it's called, and see that it never existed. See it's not real, illusion. That's called the space light meditation. And this is still the sutra level. You look for that I and you, bam, it doesn't exist that way. And you realize it directly. But that means in order to attain one point of concentration, there's 3 baskets in Buddhism: morality, concentration, this is, and wisdom. So morality means you don't get involved with other beings in an unskillful way. All morality is, it's not stealing, lying, da, 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 da. It's all about not dealing with other in an unskillful way, harming others in some way, harming yourself. So one has to be a very pure soul in that respect. Sorry for using the word soul, and then develop that concentration. But when we're distracted all the time, or when our mind's full of garbage, it's hard to do that. And it's very, very rare. In fact, it's more common even in other traditions, particularly than the Buddhist one, because if some Swami or beings, they've been out in the jungle all their life, they're not until they're getting cell phones. Just like every Lama, every Diksha, forget it, forget it. You can't sit still for that phone. How are you going to sit for a minimum of 6 months and holding one object? Bringing your mind back to the object until you, it comes in degrees. Some degree of concentration can help make things a lot better. Cultivating the one I was talking about. So, okay, to overcome attachment. So until you can realize emptiness, then attachment can't arise anymore, because you cut the grasping of the self that arises. But so meanwhile,
Meanwhile is good. What do we do meanwhile?
Our whole job in Buddha Dharma, we try to realize shunyata, and we get more and more pure. So at some point we can do that. But in being, we abide and we're less in aversion, pride, jealousy, and we're increasing love, compassion, patience. For example, if you cultivate love, and love in Buddhism is wishing another to have happiness in its cause, sincerely wishing that beings had happiness in its cause. And the more you understand the cause of suffering, the more you can make that wish. Compassion is defined as wishing another being to be free, be free of suffering in its cause. Sorry. And we learn from learning the Four Noble Truths that the cause of suffering is karma and klesha. And one of the kleshas is attachment. Probably the main one is attachment. The root one is ignorance, the ignorance that grasps at things. So from that comes attachment, and the other side of attachment is aversion. And from that comes pride and jealousy and all the other mental afflictions. So gradually one cultivates positive, because in a positive mind moment cannot exist in the same mind moment as a negative one. If you can cultivate patience, a mind of anger cannot exist in that mind. If you are all the time patient, anger can never enter. And it'd be the same with even love. For attachment, There's many ways of practicing with negative emotions. One of them is, there's a lot of them. Cultivating the positive side. And then also we don't blame ourselves when we're attached. We don't say, oh, I'm so bad, I'm attached. We slowly try to let them go and let them go, let them go. We don't give them more energy by whipping ourselves for having them. And then slowly, slowly we can cultivate. We can reflect on the disadvantages of attachment because we don't see the disadvantages of attachment. Anger and aversion is easier to see because we feel like crap when we're angry. Sometimes there's a righteous indignation, but attachment is like honey on the razor blade because people will ask, how can I have love? How can I love a person without attachment? Well, it's difficult. To become a non-attached person and still and realize that if you're around a person like that, like a Dalai Lama, they're completely happy. You realize that they're not attached to this and that, and they're happy all the time. They've done it. They're a living example. It's another living example of the Guru. I can give you maybe the greatest example I have of this, of all the things that I've ever known. The Dalai Lama, who is obviously free of attachment, for example, and he has a really good time. Lama has a really good, laughing, joyous. He was in Australia, and they were in the park. He was playing a Bodhi tree, and everybody was having a great, 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 great time. They were laughing. He was laughing and having a great time. And somebody jumped out of the crowd, and this is before they had very good security, takes the Bodhi tree out of his hand and breaks it in half and says in his face, "Religion is dead." And the Dalai Lama says, that's another opinion. And everybody who was there wanted to kill this person. He was having more joy than they were having, because attachment without joy. And apparently you can even have more joy with sex when you're less attached to it. You're not worrying about losing it all the time. It's not like a worldly dharma. You're worrying about you're having a great situation and you're gonna worry about that you're gonna lose that great situation. The whole path is cultivating, working with these mental afflictions, and always keeping in mind that we have to live in purity and gradually develop mindfulness concentration so that we can realize shunyata. And then through practicing of deity yoga, you can kind of learn to see things as empty also. Another question?
Jimmy, we have a couple questions on Zoom. If anyone, Rahul, I think you had a question, or Ajir,
Okay.
you can unmute.
Okay.
26 on.
Do I have to unmute?
No, they can unmute if they want to ask.
You said I can unmute?
No, they'll
Hi.
unmute. Yeah.
Yeah, unmute them and let them ask a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, good evening. So, thank you so much for enlightening us with your wisdom and knowledge. We are very grateful to have you.
Who-
I'm Rahul.
Putting that in one, it's not working.
Hello.
Oh, somehow we're not getting, what about,
All the people.
Hello.
We have two.
yeah, we only have two people on the scooter. If we go to,
That's the question.
hello, okay, so
Or maybe the speaker.
the speaker's not the problem. The problem is getting a face up
I
there.
mean, if we click on the speaker, yeah, ask your question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, my question was that, of course, as we know, that equanimity is one of the, I suppose, basic principles of the entire Buddhism, and I mean, how do we practically maintain or practice equanimity in like difficult circumstances, like let's say somebody who's rude to us, or just when we are not able to maintain our composure in that kind of situation. So, any tips or any practical advice regarding that?
What's your name?
Aditi.
Huh?
Aditi.
Anati. Anati. So Anati is very connected to that question. Giving up attachment is the same as giving up aversion and giving up pride and giving up jealousy. So we don't get as affected like the Dalai Lama by having non-attached. Somebody grabbed this tree and he goes, that's another opinion. That's non-attachment. So he was ultimately effective dealing with somebody, and we can become better and better at that also. There's a lot of ways of, it comes to the same thing. We're learning to cultivate the positive qualities of mind. And one of them is like, when people are rude to us like that, we think, well, what do we expect? Sometimes people are rude to us too. We expect, well, maybe their mother died yesterday. Very often we judge people and we don't know their state of mind. And so we get very offended. We can get so ridiculous that we can walk down the street and smile at somebody that they don't smile back. Somebody we know, they're preoccupied, and well, that's how sensitive we get. But in cultivating these mental filters, of course, if you can see that person is empty, etc. And then also, there's a lot of ways of dealing with mental affliction. It becomes because how do we deal with people when they're offensive? If we're practicing this non-attachment and we're practicing love and compassion, we see all beings want happiness. We're trying to cultivate bodhicitta. The Mahayana path is becoming a bodhisattva, cultivating bodhicitta, right? Okay. So we're practicing that. We promise that we're going to awaken all beings. We're going to work for the awakening of all beings. In front of you who's insulting you, everybody's included. We've sworn that it includes everybody else. And it's even a fault to not that can kind of purify the situation a little bit. You can think, you can have the positive pride. It's called Vajra pride. I'm working for the awakening of this being. So I shouldn't be offended by this being. In fact, you can even be thankful when you're practicing patience. You're thankful when someone disturbs your mind and shows you how easily you get disturbed. They become your teacher. They become your actual teacher because they offend you. Whoever pushes your buttons, you know. Often your mother's the best to push your buttons, you know. And so you cultivate like that. You cultivate the path. You cultivate non-attachment, and on the basis of that, you go through the same working with emotions. And then we don't blame ourselves. We don't judge ourselves as bad because we have disturbing emotions. That just thickens, that just makes things heavier. And then we learn in that basic Satipatthana meditation, when one of these thumbs comes through, somebody that disturbs us, we let it go. And in real life, we can let them go also. We can let them go. And that doesn't mean becoming indifferent to them. There's a difference between non-attachment and indifference. So the Bodhisattva path, we're taking a promise, a vow. We enter that path when we vow, I'm going to awaken to full awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings. That includes each and every sentient being, each and every being on the planet. Every ant, every bee, every snail, every slug, every Hitler, every Putin, or whoever we don't like, you know. And we made up some story about it. So we have that as a basis. And that doesn't mean we're good enough at cultivating to be around people who push our buttons all the time. Maybe it's better to give ourselves a little space from those people if possible, but when they're in our face, we can deal with it more easily. And we can practice by even becoming a monk or nun is having a chance, like a sapling of a tree, to be removed from the wind and the storms for a while until it gets stronger, until it can deal with these sort of things through practice. So this is a good point. Just quickly, we're trying to generate bodhicitta. This is the base of Mahayana. And so in order to even generate bodhicitta, before you can even say, I'm going to awaken for all beings, we have to equalize self and others. There's three ways of doing that. The most basic way is that everybody wants happiness. Even this person who's disturbing you, they want happiness. Just like you, they want happiness. Even a little ant, when it goes around your finger, it's just trying to avoid problems. I don't want any problems. So everybody wants happiness and no one wants suffering. The Dalai Lama, I've sat at teachings with him, and he's going to teach a very high text, the 23rd chapter of Nagarjuna, and all the scholars and Geshis are there with their texts open. How does he start the whole beings want happiness. Nobody wants suffering. He starts with that, all beings want it, and you think they're just misguided in the way you think. You feel compassion for the other person because they're very misguided in the way they're trying to develop happiness. So that's a basic way. And then the next one is one that we do, which depends on having some belief in rebirth. We do this one when we see everybody. We look at friends, enemies, and strangers. So we look at some good past, because over lifetimes, sometimes they're a friend, sometimes they're a stranger. And even within one lifetime, even one person, your wife or husband, can go from enemy to friend to indifferent. You can go through the whole life. People do it all the time. So you practice equalizing yourself. So you're not trying to avoid the enemy and help the friend, because you've had every possible relationship with everybody. They've all been your friend and enemy. So that's the second way. But to be effective, that depends on belief that we're cycling around that effective. And the third way, which is the most important, which just depends on emptiness. Where is this independently existing friend? Where is this emptiness cuts to everything? Where is this enemy? Where is this disturbing person? This disturbing person doesn't exist. They're just a walking holograph, walking holograph in reality. Saying something that's touching my mind. What is this insult when somebody's insulting us? It's an echo blowing in the breeze. Even in terms of sound, it's just a sound wave that hits our inner ear and it goes in, and we react, isn't it? So there's ways of working with that all the time. And that's our path, basically. But constantly trying to become, as we're more pure, we can have more chance of stabilizing our mind to more gradually. We can rather than minute. And then when we equal, for examples of where is this enemy? I always like to use the example of Romeo and Juliet. Never was there such a tale of woe as Juliet and a Romeo. In Verona, you had these two families. They wanted to love each other, but their families hated each other. It's so frustrating. They're so frustrated. And so Romeo is talking to his best friend Mercutio in the square, and he's totally frustrated. Because I have the name, I can have my Juliet. Show me where's this name is told. Is it in my solar plexus? Is it in my card? They show me where's this name, and I will cut it out right now. Amazing stuff. And so the whole problem of the suffering of Rome in these two families is because one had Capulet, one had, one's Germans, one's Polish, one's Yugoslav, da 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 da. These people are bad, these people are good. It's also, it's just because of a name, it's this naming. We name an enemy and it becomes concrete. Why do we name someone an enemy? Why are they our enemy? So that's why the profound way is always emptiness. Where is this enemy? So there's ways of working with all.
Thank you so much.
So there's many ways in the Dharma that you will find courses for working with emotions. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Is there anything else? Anybody here and anybody on?
Adirji, feel free to ask your question also.
Who?
Yeah. Do you hear me? Is my voice reaching to you?
Ajirji, okay.
Hello.
Can you
Can you hear me?
Can you hear?
Yeah,
Okay.
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks
It's
for this wonderful talk in the evening.
Okay.
I wanted to request, could you throw slightly more light on Tantra in different Tibetan lineages, like the Tantra in the Nyingma or Kagyu, Sakya.
Okay.
And what is the fundamental differences in them?
There's no fundamental difference. Because they all have to have emptiness.
Okay, in terms
And they
of
all come.
in terms of the approach.
Okay, so let me, yeah, in terms of the approach, well, in terms of the approach, often it's just said that the Kargyus and the Nyingmas, they meditate more and the Gelug's get a little bit too academic, but they both have both, it can go either way. So in that sense, there's a difference of approach. But let me give something very straight. This is very good about where sectarianism comes from. One, there's no such thing as a Kargyu or a Sakya or a Nyingma or a Gelug monk, because monks are all, they take the vows of they come from the Pali tradition. And so anyway, that level, there's no difference. And it's the same with Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva vows come from India, and there's no such thing as a Kargyu Bodhisattva. When it comes to the Tantras, these lineages come from the 84 Mahasiddhas. Their lineages coming from the Mahasiddhas. For example, my maybe Kabir's main person, as far as the Tantra is the Vajrayana that comes from Naropa. And the Kargyus claim Naropa as being their main of that lineage. And we got it from the Sakya. So it's coming from the Mahasiddhas. So you can't say, and they run through off a little bit more of the meditation, Mahamudra and Dzogchen in Kargyu schools. They call it Dzogchen and Nyingma. And so, and that's more just fundamental meditation, not even the deity yoga. As we said, the deity yoga goes through all different ones, the different lineages, and they just do it more. See, with me personally, I met this Lama called Lama Yeshe. So I have much more of a feeling for the poetry and the meditation of the Kargyu and the Nyingma. I did it in Nandro and the Kargyu and then in the Kargyu practice. Lama Yeshe, he was totally a yogi. He made sure that we should meditate as a monk. I was 15 years a monk. We must do the 2 months retreat and do all the Eden retreats. And also, there's another thing Lama Yeshe would say sometimes. People would ask him, "Oh, would you teach Dzogchen?" He says, "This is all I'm teaching is Dzogchen. I'm only teaching you Dzogchen. You don't even know." And everything I do is the spiniest mind that lies up. And unfortunately, a lot of those distinctions are political. The two big warring factors in Tibetan Buddhism are the Kargyus and the Gelugs. And the Gelugs were sponsored by Mongolians, and the Kargyus were sponsored by the emperors in Beijing, It's political stuff, But and a lot of it comes from little things like the Gelugs got all the gold that was given by the CIA to, this kind of stuff about going into Tibet, these kind of issues. But great lamas from all four schools know exactly that all the great yogis in all four schools, they realize the same emptiness and they do it with pretty much the same method. And those different tantric ways are taught in all four schools, but they're emphasized a little more maybe. I feel also that sometimes the Gelug can get a little bit academic, but then it gets put down. When I was doing Kargyu practice, all the Gelugs, they don't practice, we practice. And this is nonsense. This is sectarianism. But I had this teacher, Lama Yeshe, and I didn't need to seek out some, it was, meditation was everything. And on his deathbed, he even said, "Beware of the hard-headed logicians," things like that. And even the Dalai Lama, when he's teaching Tantra, he says a lot of those other things go out the window. We're dealing with subtler mind. Some of the same arguments, they go out the window when we get to subtler mind. So it's a vast topic. But if you get into Deity Yoga, you get initiated into it. And like I said, the one that maybe myself and perhaps Kabir practice, I think he practices this one. It comes from Naropa, and Naropa is considered to be the father of the lineage of the Kargu. And in the Kargu school, they practice the Maitrapa is the Mahati that they get from, or they come from these different lineages. Yeah, he was a principal of the Nalanda University, and then the ogress appeared to him and says, "You don't know anything. You think you know everything." He thought he was the greatest of all. And he said, "You don't know anything." So he sent him to find his guru, Tilopa, who just blew all his conceptions out, you know. It's that's the lineage. Tilopa, Tanaropa, Marpa, Milarepa, boom. So there's these 4 schools of Tibetan Buddhism, but all of them, emptiness is the same. Mahamudra means emptiness, etc., etc. There's very good sources of this from great beings from all schools that will teach that very same thing. The Dalai Lama is a great source because 40% of his practice is Nyingmapa. And so he's definitely equal measure of those two. And he's a great practitioner of Guru Rinpoche, as is Lama Zopa Rinpoche, etc., etc. Wow. So, okay. Sorry.
You want to ask? No, you want. Oh, you make it clear and short.
Is there any difference between emptiness and
Empty of what? We have to, everything is empty of what? Empty of being independent, because it's dependent arising. It's exactly the point. And then you could say, why don't we just say dependent arising? Because emptiness sounds so weird. Everything is empty, everything is empty. Because what you realize when I describe that meditation, when you generate you realize it's called the space-like meditation. Boom. So you realize the emptiness that it never existed. And then when you come out of that meditation, it's called the oh God, what do they call it? My mind's over because I'm
Not postman.
no, there's not postman. It's the meditation, and then it becomes everything's appearing again, but then you don't buy into the appearance. You see it as empty, so you see it. You see everything like the moon in a lake as a reflection, etc., etc. Illusion-like, the illusion-like meditation. You see everything as illusion-like. You see that the I never existed, and then everything you encounter, you've cracked the big one. You realize the emptiness of the I, and gradually everything else you see, it's only an illusion. We don't say it's an illusion. It's very important. It's illusion-like. This is very, very, very important, because if you say everything's illusion, then you're saying everybody's suffering is illusion. And Buddha says, what I taught is 2 things: suffering and the end of suffering, dukkha and the end of dukkha. And you can't go saying that sentient beings, when they're in dukkha, when they're suffering, they're suffering. Okay, it's illusion, but it's not illusion for them. So it's very dangerous. And this is where you get this indifference of almost like a system where, like when Naipaul first went to India, he asked a question of his host, and there's somebody sitting on the sidewalk, there's just a head and a hand. What about that? Oh, they're just having their being, But when you can't say it's just an illusion, it's just an illusion. But it's illusion-like, and Tsongkhapa made a really big deal about how that difference is the difference between anyway, blah, blah. So where were we?
Gonna have to wrap up.
Okay, we
Quarter to
can
nine.
wrap
But I
up.
think it's whetted people's appetite. It's actually a very good method to
Well,
bring
that-
people back to Tushita.
Well, that's
Many
the-
unanswered.
That's the idea. There's so much stuff, and you can get a taste. Well, just one little thing quickly
Sure.
about Tantra. Okay, in Tantra, you have this thing called Deity Yoga. Will you become? It's everything.
About rituals.
Huh?
Sometimes more about rituals.
No. It's about becoming Tara. It's about becoming the Buddha. And so the basis is emptiness, because it's possible to realize the basis of everything is emptiness. When we get up in the morning, we're empty. But if you identify with Tara, and you've given that Tara by your guru, Dalai Lama, and you imagine Tara, you know Tara is empty because you're imagining her. She's not existing from her own side. So the whole practice is you're seeing her and you imagined her, and at the end of the practice, you bring it right down to your heart again, where it originated. So without philosophy, you're seeing Tara as being empty in some way, you know? And it's the same way when we get up in the morning. The whole world is empty, but we're habituated that it's concrete. So that's one way, and not to mention the subtler mind, etc., of realizing emptiness. So you're identifying with the subtler self and identifying with it, which is amazingly profound. It's an amazingly profound method. I know she's empty because I'm imagining her. Dalai Lama gave me the visualization. So anyway, that's just one aspect. So then we should dedicate, and thank you so much for your patience. I'm pretty rough today. Oh, you know, I didn't know where I was going to go with this. And there's so much, but exactly like Kabir was saying, the idea is we cover so much territory. And then a fundamental reason for this whole teaching was when Tisha brought Dharma to Tibet for the new translation. He came to Tibet in Sutra and Tantra had become two different religions. Vajrayana is Mahayana. It's a fast Mahayana. It's Mahayana. And a lot of modern people, when I was in Baba Kargi, we go, we're practicing Vajrayana as if Mahayana is something inferior. No, it's Mahayana. It's not a different vehicle. And so Tisha, there's this purest being of all time. So what did Tisha teach? Lojong, 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 trying to bring people back into it.
In India, they believe that Vajrayana have a different.
Yeah, it's not. It's part of Vajrayana. That's why the whole thing is Sutra and Tantra. And I wanted to say that they're both subsumed under the whole name of the talk is under Mahayana. So that's an important aspect. Is a simple thing. They're not a different yana. It's not different. The emptiness is exactly the same, but there might be a faster way to get to it, but it's the same. There's no difference in like that. So anyway, any virtue we may have accumulated through reflecting on these beautiful aspects of the so diverse, may they serve as a cause for our awakening. Because only when we are awake will we be effective in benefiting other beings. As a bodhisattvas or aspiring bodhisattvas, we want to be effective in benefiting other beings. And until we're totally awake, a Buddha, we won't be totally effective. So we dedicate that we will become awakened, so we'll become completely effective. And we wish that in the meanwhile, we'll become more effective in benefiting all, including ourselves. Very important. We're working for ourselves as well. So, and you can guarantee that if you didn't understand a word of this, or if you go take some initiation from some great being and you don't understand a word of it, just the effort that you make to listen to a teaching is actually, you wish that may that become the cause of my enlightenment. Just the effort. That's why it's so important, motivation and dedication. It just magnifies things so beautifully. So anyway, thank you very much for your kindness and your patience. So may we meet again. Okay.
Thank you, Jimi Neal. So after a long day,